The first time I felt it, that sharp, metallic taste of betrayal, it was Thanksgiving. Not some dramatic betrayal, not at first. Just a skipped invitation. A silence where a phone call should have been. But when it's your own daughter, it doesn't need to be loud to cut deep. For the past 8 years, since my wife Janice passed, I'd been the rock. Grandpa Dave, always with the pumpkin pie and worn-out stories about 79. And until this year, my daughter Elise had always saved a seat for me at her table, right between her husband Craig's father and that god-awful lamp I'd given them as a housewarming gift. They'd even pretended to like it. But this year? Nothing. No call. No email. Not even one of those half-hearted texts Elise sends when she's just so busy. I tried calling twice the week before, just to confirm what I already feared. The second time, it rang and went to voicemail before the first buzz finished vibrating in my palm. So, I did what old men like me do when we're trying not to look pathetic. I made a small Thanksgiving dinner for one. Just enough turkey to trick myself into pretending it was intentional. I even set the table for 2, like Janice was still around. Old habits. I hadn't even made it through the blessing before the tears came. No sobbing, no theatrics. Just that quiet, burning kind of sadness that sits behind your eyes and dares you to blink. When I finally did, it spilled over. Later that night, I opened Facebook. Not because I wanted to torture myself, but because somewhere in my mind I still clung to the chance it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe they were traveling. Maybe they'd postponed. But there she was, Elise, standing beside her massive dining room table with her perfect children and her perfect husband and that same damn lamp. 12 people in the photo. 13 chairs. The caption read, "Thankful for family, tradition, and love." I stared at that photo for almost an hour. I counted every plate. Every smile. Every glass of wine. 13 chairs. One of them had been mine. Or should have been. The anger didn't come right away. That would have been easier. What came first was shame. An awful, crawling shame that made me question what I did wrong. Was I too needy? Too critical of Craig? Had I offended one of the grandkids with my jokes? But then, like a curtain pulled back, came clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't about a scheduling error or some allergy excuse or a mix-up with invites. I was being phased out. Softly. Subtly. Like a background character written out of a show when he's no longer entertaining. And for the first time in my life, after 67 years of hard work, self-sacrifice, birthday parties, emergency babysitting, tuition checks, and emotional labor, I felt expendable. Replaceable. But I'm not a man you phase out quietly. And Elise? She forgot who raised her. Who paid for her wedding when Craig's startup flopped. Who watched their kids for 3 weeks while they vacationed in the Amalfi Coast. I sat down with a legal pad and my black pilot pen, the one Janice used to steal from my desk, and I started listing every dollar, every hour, every favor I'd ever handed them. It was time to balance the books. And oh, I had more to withdraw than they remembered depositing. I wasn't angry yet. Not in the way that burns fast and fizzles. No, this was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, quiet and calculating. The kind of cold that makes you clean out your garage not because it's dirty, but because you want control over something again. The list started as a form of therapy. A way to keep my hands busy. But the more I wrote, the more the numbers stopped feeling abstract. They were real. Tangible. Like receipts I never asked for but finally needed. 2014, the down payment for Elise and Craig's forever home, $38,000. They'd been denied the loan without it, and Craig had the nerve to say, "We'll pay you back in 5 years, tops." I knew better. But I smiled and handed over the cashier's check anyway. 2016, Craig's second failed business, some AI startup he said would revolutionize local agriculture. I gave them $15,000 just so they wouldn't lose their car. 2018, I paid for the twins' private school tuition. $9,200 a year. Just until things stabilize, Elise said. 3 years later, I was still writing the checks. Then there were the smaller things. The $3,000 fridge when theirs broke. The $4,500 emergency roof repair. A $1,200 vet bill for their golden retriever that I learned about after the fact. Elise had just Venmo requested me and said, "Hope that's okay. Love you." Total it all up, and I was north of $90,000. And yet, not even a damn seat at the table. That list grew, line by line, not just in money but in memory. Babysitting when Janice had just passed and I was barely keeping myself together. Showing up to every school recital. Driving an hour to fix a leaky faucet when Craig was too swamped. But I started noticing a pattern. Every time they needed something, I was indispensable. A hero. A pillar. But the second I wasn't convenient, when I started talking more about retirement, about downsizing, about finally traveling to see the Grand Canyon, I became hard to invite. I flipped the legal pad to a fresh page. What they take for granted. My silence. My availability. My guilt. The last one hit like a freight train. They knew I'd never say no. That's what this had become, a quiet, ongoing transaction, where love was the currency I was always expected to pay in advance. Well, I was about to overdraft. The first move wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. I canceled the automatic payment I'd been making monthly to the twins' tuition fund. I hadn't told them it was me still covering the cost. Elise had assumed the school was giving them a legacy discount because she'd once volunteered for the PTA. Let her think that until the invoice showed up. Let her scramble. The second move came with more teeth. I made an appointment at the bank, my bank, and started the process of revoking the cosignature I had on their mortgage. Took a bit of paperwork, but since they'd refinanced and I hadn't signed the latest docs, I still held leverage they'd forgotten about. Their interest rate? About to spike. But I wouldn't let them drown. No, that would be too merciful. They'd feel the floor shift beneath their perfect lives, and only then would they look up and remember the man who'd been holding it steady. That evening, I opened Facebook again. The photo was still there. Still 13 chairs. Still the fake laughter of people who smiled through lies. I clicked on Craig's profile. He was tagged in a post about a local leadership panel, talking about entrepreneurial resilience. I almost laughed. Then I had an idea. Not revenge. Not yet. But something that would test their definition of resilience. Craig once said something during one of his obnoxious dinner toasts: true innovation comes from disrupting the expected. He said it while swirling a glass of Napa Red and wearing a blazer he couldn't afford without my help. Well, Craig, I'm about to disrupt the hell out of your expected. That next Monday, I paid a visit to one of my oldest friends, Howard Langley. We'd played poker together every other Friday since 1992, right up until Janice passed and I stopped showing up to everything. Howard never pushed. Just kept a seat open. He also happens to be the treasurer at St. Mary's Preparatory, where the twins go to school. I brought a tin of shortbread cookies, Janice's recipe, still scribbled on a yellowed index card, and sat across from him in his wood-paneled office. Hell of a surprise, Dave, Howard said, smiling as he reached for a cookie. Everything all right? I'm done, I said simply. No more tuition payments. He raised an eyebrow. Wasn't sure they even knew it was you footing the bill. They don't. Let's keep it that way. But when they ask why tuition's overdue, don't sugarcoat it. Just tell them the donor pulled out. Use the word donor, Howard. Howard leaned back in his creaky chair and studied me like he was seeing a different man for the first time. You want them to feel it. I want them to remember who they erased. He nodded slowly. Done. That same week, I went through my storage locker, the one filled with things Elise had asked me to hold just until they had room. Old dining sets, baby cribs, a couple of expensive art pieces Craig had bought during his collector phase. They'd forgotten about half of it. And suddenly, I remembered everything. I photographed each item. Uploaded it to a local estate sales group. Slapped on prices that weren't just fair, they were fire sale cheap. Gone in 2 days. Cash in hand. No remorse. Then I took the real step. There was an account Janice and I had created for Elise before she got married, her safety net. It was only about $25,000 now, never touched. I'd kept it active all these years out of habit. Nostalgia, maybe. Or guilt. I closed it. Transferred every cent to a travel fund in my own name. Same with the minor custodial account we'd opened for the twins. Let someone else be the safety net now. By the end of the week, Elise still hadn't called. No texts. No emails. Not even a thank you for the gifts I'd mailed her kids last month. I doubted they even opened them. But I wasn't waiting anymore. So, I made a final stop, one Elise never saw coming. I paid a visit to Craig's panel event at the Chamber of Commerce. I didn't plan to stay long. Just long enough to take a seat near the back, listen to him boast about self-made success, and catch the smug way he dropped buzzwords like bootstrap and grit. Near the end of the Q&A, I raised my hand. He saw me and froze. I'm curious, I said, standing slowly, my voice clear across the auditorium. How does someone bootstrap a down payment they didn't pay? Or a business kept alive by someone else's retirement fund? Gasps. A few confused glances. Craig stammered. I'm sorry, sir, do I know? You should, I cut in. I'm the guy who made sure your family had a home, a car, and a future. And I'd like to know what exactly you're going to bootstrap when that rug disappears. Silence. Tension. And Craig, always the charmer, tried to laugh it off. I walked out before he could finish his next sentence. Back home, I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat by the window, staring out at a world that suddenly felt more like mine again. No more silent martyrdom. I wasn't just reclaiming money. I was reclaiming my name. It was a week after Craig's panel meltdown when Elise finally called. I'd been expecting it, though not in the way it actually happened. She didn't call to apologize. Or even to check on me. She called because chaos was finally leaking into her bubble, and she needed someone to mop it up. Dad? Her voice trembled, a little too breathy, like she'd been rehearsing the right emotional pitch. Hi. Hey. So, there's been this weird issue with the school. The twins' school. I asked flatly. Yeah. Apparently tuition is late. Like, 3 months late. But that doesn't make sense, because I thought we had that figured out. We. Figured out. Her careful phrasing made my stomach tighten in that familiar way, the way it always did when Elise turned something shameful into something shared. I'm confused, I said. What part of it did we figure out? There was a pause. Then, the quiet sound of her composing herself. She'd never done well with confrontation. Craig usually ran defense, but he wasn't on the line this time. I just mean, you've always helped. And it's kind of sudden, this change. You're right, I said. It is sudden. Like not being invited to Thanksgiving. She didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. Elise, I continued, my voice calm but colder than I meant it to be, your family didn't just forget me. You erased me. And now that the math stopped working in your favor, you're suddenly ready to remember. Dad, that's not fair. Oh, but it's accurate. She sighed, sharp and theatrical. You're punishing the kids, you know. They love that school. No, I said, you love what the school says about you. They're 10. They'd love public school just as much if you treated it like an adventure. You don't understand how things work now. I understand exactly. That's the problem. Another pause. Then, voice wobbling into dangerous territory, she asked, is this really about Thanksgiving? Elise, I stood up, pacing as I gripped the phone tighter. This is about every favor turned into an obligation. Every time you cashed my love like a blank check and called it parenting. Every time you let Craig talk about bootstrap success while I quietly paid for the boots. You think I don't appreciate it? I think you don't think about it at all. She hung up. Just like that. No goodbye, no I love you. And still, I didn't regret a word. That weekend, the real ripple effect started. I got a call from Howard at the school. They came in, he said. Tried to play dumb. Elise cried. Craig threatened a lawsuit. Let them, I said. Howard chuckled. They can't afford one. Also, I may have let it slip that the donor didn't die, just changed his priorities. I could almost hear Craig's face twist from here. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I sent an email to the HOA at Elisa's subdivision, reminding them of a clause I'd had added to the original property agreement, one that allowed me input on renovations and landscaping due to my substantial financial stake in the property at the time of purchase. It was petty. But satisfying. Especially when I requested that the gaudy new stonework Craig had added without permit be removed. I followed that with a quiet note to Elisa's neighborhood Facebook group, posing as a concerned citizen, curious about why someone on the HOA board had multiple unpaid contractor debts attached to their address. A link to a lien search website did the rest. That's the thing about the elite suburban illusion, they spend so much energy curating the facade that the slightest breeze reveals the scaffolding underneath. And I just kicked up a storm. By mid-January, the tone of Elisa's messages had changed. Gone were the cheerful emojis and the, hey dad. Just checking in, texts. Now it was straight desperation, long paragraphs about the mortgage, about Craig's bad quarter, about how the economy was affecting everyone. My favorite line. I know we've all made mistakes, but can we move forward now? The kids miss you. No. What she missed was the money. The quiet compliance. The father who would show up, wallet open, mouth shut. But that man was gone. I didn't reply. Not yet. Not until I'd finished what I'd started. The final move came the day Craig and Elise threw their annual winter party. They billed it as a community networking evening, complete with catered hors d'oeuvres, a live string quartet, and customized ice sculptures. Yes, ice sculptures, one shaped like a sailboat for some reason, probably a metaphor only Craig understood. It had been a staple of their social calendar for years. A place where Craig could puff his chest and talk about his board memberships while Elise floated from guest to guest like a suburban duchess. This year, I received no invitation. Which was perfect. Because I wasn't planning to attend as a guest. Earlier that week, I'd mailed 12 anonymous envelopes, one to each of Craig and Elisa's closest friends and colleagues, all culled from social media posts and RSVP lists Elise had foolishly made public. Each envelope contained a copy of their unpaid tuition invoice, a screenshot of the lien notice on their home, a bank statement showing the withdrawal from the trust Elise never knew I closed, and a final note, typed plainly. Appearances are expensive. Ask yourself, who's really paying for this party? No signature. No return address. Just truth, sent first class. I timed it so the envelopes would arrive the morning of the event. That night, I sat at home with a glass of scotch and a lawn chair pulled up to my front window. Not because I was expecting fireworks. But because I knew the kind of damage truth does in quiet places. It wasn't long before the text came. From Elise. What did you do? People are leaving. Then a second. This is sick. You've always hated Craig. Admit it. And a third. You're ruining our lives because of one holiday. Are you insane? I didn't reply. But I did smile. Because here's the thing, I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped holding it up. Their lives were never built on love, or partnership, or gratitude. They were built on my back. And now that I'd stepped aside, the whole thing was collapsing under its own shallow weight. Later that night, a neighbor of theirs, someone I barely knew, sent me a message. Somehow, she'd pieced together that I was the source. Maybe the bank records. Maybe just the style of the reveal. Her message was short. That was brutal. But honestly, kind of inspiring. I didn't write back. But I saved the message. And when I finished my scotch, I whispered Janice's name to the ceiling and said, "I'm not done yet." Because Elise and Craig weren't the only ones who needed to learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The fallout from the winter party wasn't just social, it was structural. By Tuesday, 3 couples had withdrawn from Craig's networking circle. Elisa's once popular book club had postponed indefinitely. And the PDA, where she used to wield influence like a scepter, had quietly appointed someone else to coordinate the spring fundraiser. It didn't matter that no one spoke openly about it. In their world, silence was louder than gossip. People didn't need to say what they knew. They showed it by where they didn't go, who they didn't greet, and which invitations stopped arriving. And Elise, for once in her life, couldn't spin it. Not when their past due notices were showing up in their inbox faster than she could filter them. I'd gotten confirmation from Howard that the twins were now on probationary status at St. Mary's. Unless a payment was received within 30 days, they'd be unenrolled. Craig tried a GoFundMe, dressed it up like a temporary setback due to medical hardship. The gall. I took a screenshot from my records and watched as it quietly disappeared 2 days later. Probably flagged. Or maybe someone reminded him how many catered parties he'd hosted in the last year. Then came the ultimate humiliation, the minivan. Craig traded in his Tesla. I saw it parked outside their house one morning as I drove by on my way to breakfast with Rosa, my sister-in-law. A beige 2011 Chrysler Town & Country. It looked like a resignation letter on wheels. And still, no apology. No acknowledgement. Not even an ounce of humility. Instead, Elise doubled down. She sent me an email. A full-page essay about emotional abuse, about control through money, and how she was reclaiming autonomy for her family. Reclaiming. As if she hadn't lived on my dime for a decade. I didn't respond to that one either. But I did something else. I called my lawyer. There was one asset they still didn't know I controlled, a piece of land Elise and Craig thought had passed to them automatically when Janice died. But the paperwork had never been finalized. The title, still in my name, was technically part of the family trust I'd frozen weeks ago. It wasn't just a sentimental lot. It bordered a local trail and had been earmarked for a backyard expansion Craig had been talking about for years. I filed a temporary restriction on it. Nothing dramatic. Just a little red flag in the county records that would halt any future construction permits. If they tried to build, they'd be stopped. I knew it would be weeks before they even realized it. But the seed was planted. And while I waited, I turned my attention towards something I hadn't considered in a long time, my own life. I started taking walks again. Signed up for a community class on woodworking. I even had dinner at Rosa's and laughed until my stomach hurt, something I hadn't done since Janice's funeral. One night, after putting the finishing touches on a handmade photo frame, I sat at my workbench and looked at a picture of Janice in her garden. "You'd like what I'm doing," I whispered. Not because it's revenge. But because I finally remembered who I am without being their safety net. Outside, a soft snow was falling. And inside, I was finally warming up. There's something delicious about watching people who curate their lives for applause suddenly perform to silence. That's what Elise and Craig had always done, curate. Their lives were a portfolio. Every brunch photo, every charitable donation, every string-lit patio dinner was less about joy and more about status. Proof they were thriving. Relevant. So when the silence grew after the party, when friends stopped replying and local collaborators ghosted Craig's emails, they did what cornered performers always do. They turned inward and lashed outward. Elise tried to spin the story first. She posted a long, pseudo-spiritual Facebook status about toxic generational expectations and the courage it takes to cut ties with manipulative energy. Subtle. I wasn't named, of course. That would have been too real. But everyone knew. She ended it with a quote attributed to some guru I'd never heard of. Just because they fed you doesn't mean they loved you. I laughed out loud when I read it. That same week, Craig's profile disappeared from LinkedIn. I assumed someone at the panel he'd embarrassed himself at had followed up. Professional circles in Spokane are like whispering hallways, one lie echoes forever. And the biggest echo? A blog post. It showed up on Medium, authored by a woman named Natalie Quinn. She'd once worked with Craig on one of his short-lived business ventures. She wasn't vindictive, her tone was clinical, even generous, but she laid out the facts. Craig had promised funding he didn't have, leveraged relationships he couldn't sustain, and left her to clean up a mess when his vision collapsed. She linked to my anonymous evidence from the winter party. I always wondered how they kept up the image, she wrote. Now I know. It was borrowed respect. And borrowed money. It went semi-viral. Not national. But enough that someone added it to a Spokane subreddit, and from there, well, the facade cracked wide open. The next time I drove past Elise and Craig's house, the home sweet home welcome mat was gone. The porch lights were off in the early evening. The house had that look, subtle, but unmistakable, of people no longer expecting company. They were hiding. The community they once courted was no longer interested in playing pretend. And then something unexpected happened. Michael, their oldest, called me. He was 12. Too young to understand the full complexity of adult betrayals. But smart enough to sense tension. Grandpa, he said, his voice quiet. Are you mad at us? I paused. No, I said gently. Not at you. Did we do something wrong? That gutted me. No, buddy. None of this is your fault. He was quiet a while. Then, I miss when you used to come to our house. I miss that too. Will you ever come back? There it was, the first crack in my armor. I felt something in my throat that had no place in revenge. I promised to take him and his sister out to the movies next weekend. Just us. I wouldn't punish them for their parents' selfishness. But it reminded me why I was doing this in the first place. Not just to prove a point. But to reclaim dignity. To stop the cycle of being taken for granted. And perhaps, in time, to give those kids a version of family built on honesty, not appearances. That night, I opened my safe and took out a letter Janice had written before she died. It was dated 2 months after her diagnosis, written in her familiar, looping script. One line stood out. Don't let them make you small, Dave. Even if they smile while doing it. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my wallet. A reminder that I was finally living by her wisdom. No more shrinking. And as for Elise and Craig? They were learning, slowly and publicly, what it feels like to stand on a pedestal that was never theirs to begin with. The day Elise showed up at my door, she didn't knock. She pounded. Desperate, wild. I could see her through the peephole, hair pulled back too tight, tears she didn't bother to wipe away, fury radiating from her like heat off pavement. I let her knock 4 more times before I opened the door. Dad, she gasped, pushing past me like she owned the place. We need to talk. No, I said, closing the door gently. You need to talk. I'll listen. She paced my living room like a trapped cat. My clean, quiet living room. The one she hadn't stepped into in nearly a year. What you did, what you're doing, it's destroying us. You've turned our lives into a soap opera. I said nothing. We're pariahs now. Craig might lose his job. The twins, people whisper about them at school. About us. All because you couldn't handle being left out of one holiday dinner. I studied her carefully. Elise, I said quietly. Sit down. No. She crossed her arms, a wall of defensiveness. Not until you tell me why. Why you hate us so much. Hate. I repeated. You think this is about hate? I think you've lost control, and you're punishing us because we're not groveling for your approval. I leaned forward. Let me ask you something. In the last 10 years, when was the last time you thanked me? She blinked. For what? There it is, I said softly. You don't even know. I stood and walked to the desk drawer, pulling out the ledger I'd kept, neatly organized documentation of every dollar, every transfer, every favor they'd forgotten they requested. I set it on the coffee table and opened it to the first page. I kept receipts, Elise. For everything. Because I knew this day would come. When you'd rewrite history to make yourselves the victims. She didn't touch the book. Just stared at it like it might explode. You were my daughter, I continued. And I was so desperate to stay close to you after your mother died, I let myself become your safety net. Your errand boy. Your anonymous donor. That's not, she started. Every mortgage payment. Every tuition check. The down payment. The renovations. Even that damn lamp in your living room, I paid for it. And all I wanted was a seat at your table. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something in her cracked. You humiliated us, she said. In front of everyone. No, I said. You did that to yourselves. I just stopped hiding it. She finally sat down. Quiet now. Like someone who had run out of excuses. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. That's because you can't fix it. You can't undo 10 years of taking without giving. I miss Mom, she said suddenly. Her voice broke then, raw and childlike. She always knew how to balance us. You got harder after she died. No, I said, softer. I just stopped being afraid to disappoint you. The silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that makes you decide who you want to be next. Elise, I said, I forgave you months ago. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. She looked up, confused. I'll be in your life. I want to see the twins. I'll answer your calls. But this? I tapped the ledger. This ends now. I don't owe you comfort. I don't owe you money. I don't owe you my silence. She nodded, barely. When she left, she didn't hug me. But she paused at the doorway. I'll send the kids new school info, she said. They're transferring. I nodded. And Dad, she said, almost too quiet to hear. You were right about the lamp. It's hideous. The door closed behind her. I stood in the quiet for a long time, staring at the space she'd occupied. She'd lost her pedestal. And I'd found my footing. A week passed. Then another. The ledger sat untouched on my desk, its pages no longer pulsing with anger. It had become a kind of monument, quiet, solid, unnecessary. Like a tombstone for a part of me I no longer wanted back. Elise didn't call again. She sent the school info like she promised. No emojis. No fake warmth. Just a one-line email with the new address and a short note. If you'd like to send them something for spring break, they're excited about books. Books. That detail landed like a pebble in my chest. I remembered reading to them every night I visited. They used to fight over who got to sit on my lap. I sent a package, nothing flashy. Just paperbacks with dog-eared potential and a short letter tucked inside. Take care of these stories. The world can be cruel, but books will always tell you the truth. No reply. I didn't need one. Meanwhile, word of Craig's unemployment trickled through the neighborhood like a spilled glass of wine. His startup had quietly folded. A few of his former partners were already on to the next venture. Elise had applied for a part-time admin job at a local boutique. From what Rosa heard through the grapevine, they were selling off furniture. The lamp was listed on Facebook Marketplace. I considered buying it back just to burn it. Instead, I printed the listing and folded it into the ledger. A souvenir. What surprised me most in those weeks wasn't their downfall, it was how quickly I stopped needing to watch it. The engine of rage that had fueled me for so long finally sputtered. Not because they deserved mercy, but because I deserved peace. And then, on a Sunday morning as I watered the violets Janice had planted the spring before she died, I got a call. Michael. Grandpa. Hey, buddy. How's school? It's weird, he said. They don't have uniforms. And the cafeteria smells like old peanut butter. I laughed. Well, that's how you know it's a real school. He was quiet for a moment. Is Mom mad at you? I exhaled slowly. No. Not anymore. Are you mad at her? I was, I admitted. But not now. Okay, he said. Because I told her I want you at my birthday this year. And she didn't say no. That pause. That precious, uncertain pause. It held everything. I'd love that, I said. Cool. It's at a bowling alley. Mom says we can only bring one friend. But I picked you. My throat tightened. You've got good taste. Later that night, I pulled out Janice's letter again. Not for guidance this time. But because I missed her. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for Elise and Craig. But for the fire. For what it burned away. For what it revealed underneath. Because sometimes it takes destruction to finally see what's worth rebuilding. And sometimes, silence is the revenge. Because in that silence, the people who thought they held power hear the truth. You weren't the source. You were the drain. March thawed Spokane slowly that year, like the earth was testing if it was safe to be soft again. I'd spent the last month walking more. Not power walking like the retirees in track suits. Just, wandering. Through parks. Along the river. Through neighborhoods where porch lights glowed like invitations and nobody asked you to earn your seat. One afternoon, I passed by a local community center with a handwritten sign taped to the door. Volunteers needed, after-school reading club. All ages welcome. Something tugged. That night, I opened the box under my bed, the one where I kept Janice's old lesson plans. She'd been a teacher before Elise was born, the kind who used stickers well into middle school and kept mugs with cheesy slogans like, "Teachers make tiny hearts grow." She would have signed up in a heartbeat. The next day, I did. It wasn't glamorous. The reading club was 2 folding tables, a chipped bookshelf, and a dozen kids who smelled like sweat and Cheetos. But by the second week, they were fighting over who got to read with Mr. Dave. I found myself smiling more. And not that forced, polite smile I used at Elisa's dinner parties. This was real. Relaxed. Like I was exhaling for the first time in years. One of the boys, Isaiah, asked if I'd ever written a book. I laughed. I've lived one, I said. But later that night, I thought about it. Not a book. But a letter. Not to Elise. Not even to the grandkids. To whoever came next. So I opened a fresh journal and wrote across the first page. For the ones who come after, a guide to boundaries, dignity, and never paying for someone else's granite countertops. I filled the first few pages easily. Stories. Advice. Warnings. Not angry, not bitter, just honest. I wrote about the Thanksgiving chair that stayed empty. About the slow erosion of respect that happens when you confuse generosity with submission. About the power of saying, not anymore. And about the night I took back everything they mistook as theirs. It wasn't revenge anymore. Not really. It was a manual for freedom. A declaration that love, to be real, must also be earned. A reminder that silence doesn't mean consent. And that family, without respect, is just tradition in costume. That Saturday, Rosa invited me over for dinner. Her grandson had built a birdhouse and wanted me to see it. We sat around her kitchen table, laughing over roast chicken and old memories, and I realized something. This was what family looked like. Not blood. But effort. Presence. People who showed up, not because you bankrolled their life, but because they liked who you were when no one was watching. I drove home that night under a sky full of stars. No music. No phone buzzing. Just the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove. Because revenge may satisfy. But restoration? That heals. The letter came on a Wednesday. Legal envelope. Certified mail. The kind that makes your stomach tense before you even open it. Inside, a lawsuit. Filed by Craig. Small Claims Court. The complaint? Unlawful interference in private affairs and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I laughed. Out loud. For a full minute. The amount they were suing for. $3,500. The breakdown. $1,200 for party damage and vendor cancellations. $900 for reputation repair services, whatever that meant. $1,400 for emotional harm due to malicious defamation. I set the letter on my desk, poured myself a cup of coffee, and savored the irony. The man who used me like a bottomless bank account was now asking me to reimburse him for the mess he'd made of his own life. Craig's lawsuit was laughably weak. But I wasn't going to dismiss it with a scoff. No, I'd attend. I'd show up in person, calm and polite. And I'd bring documentation. All of it. The receipts. The emails. The text messages. The canceled checks. The photos from Facebook showing Craig clinking wine glasses under string lights I paid for. Even the spreadsheet I'd kept during the worst months, the one Janice used to tease me about. Court was set for a Tuesday afternoon. Room 4B. A modest courtroom that smelled like tired wood and overworked air fresheners. Craig arrived in a pressed blazer that didn't quite fit anymore and that smile he used at networking events, the one that looked painted on. He was alone. I was not. I had my binder. My facts. My quiet dignity. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened carefully as Craig made his case. He spun tales of character assassination and economic sabotage. Said I had weaponized personal history to embarrass his family in a time of vulnerability. The judge turned to me. Mr. Flores. I opened my binder and passed her the top page, a ledger summary showing $237,468 in financial support over 9 years. Then the next page, a screenshot of the GoFundMe Craig had deleted. Then the next, the anonymous envelopes, yes, I'd kept a sample, and the blog post from Natalie Quinn. I did send those, I said. Every word in them is true. I have documentation for each claim. None of it was private. All of it was real. The judge looked through each page. Did you falsify anything? No. Did you hack any accounts? Steal any information? No. Craig interrupted. But he humiliated us. The judge gave him a long, flat look. Mr. Jenkins, embarrassment isn't illegal. It's often earned. She flipped back to my original ledger. And he paid your mortgage for 5 years? Craig flinched. And your children's tuition? Another flinch. The judge closed the binder. Case dismissed. Craig stood there, stunned. As if he truly believed charm could still save him. Mr. Flores, the judge added, you're within your rights to file a counterclaim. I'm not encouraging you to. Just stating the legal option. I nodded politely. Thank you, Your Honor. But I've collected enough. On the way out, Craig stopped me in the hallway. You think this is over? He hissed. I looked at him. Really looked. At the sweat on his brow. The desperation in his eyes. The crumbling edges of a man who'd never built anything on his own. It's been over, I said. You just haven't caught up. And I walked away. Back to my car. Back to my life. Not with triumph. But with relief. Not because I'd won. But because I no longer needed to. Spring in Spokane is slow and reluctant. But when it arrives, it does so in full bloom, crocuses pushing through thawed soil, cherry blossoms lining the streets like confetti for a parade no one remembers organizing. I found myself walking past Elisa's old street one day. Not intentionally. I'd been driving to the nursery for new soil when muscle memory took the wheel. Their house looked the same at first glance. But I noticed the small signs, the lawn overgrown, the porch rail in need of paint, the flower beds hollowed out with nothing planted. The yard was silent, not the kind of peaceful silence I remembered from Janice's garden, but the kind that feels like absence. A for sale sign stood crooked near the curb. I parked half a block away and just watched. An SUV pulled into the driveway. Craig got out first. Then Elise. She looked thinner. Tired. Not defeated, exactly, but altered. Michael and his sister followed. She held a box of books in her arms. Moving day. I didn't approach. Not out of bitterness. But because it wasn't my scene anymore. My role had ended, curtain drawn. I was a former benefactor, a former doormat, a former father taken for granted. Now, I was just Dave. A man on his way to buy soil and plant new things. I stayed until they disappeared inside, then I drove away. No lingering. No melodrama. Back home, I called Rosa. You busy? Nope, she said. Why? Thought I'd stop by. Show you something I'm working on. 20 minutes later, I was on her back porch, showing her the birdhouse I'd helped Isaiah fix. We laughed about Craig's lawsuit, marveled at how Elise used to be the soft-hearted one, and traded memories like old coins, worn, but valuable. You're lighter, Rosa said, watching me over her iced tea. I am, I admitted. For the first time in a long while. Think she'll ever come around? Your daughter. I thought about it. I don't know, I said. But that's her journey. Not my burden. We watched the birds a while. 2 of them fought over a branch, wings flapping until one flew off. Rosa raised her glass. To new perches. I clinked mine against hers. And sturdier nests. Later that evening, I walked past the ledger on my shelf. I almost threw it out. But then I didn't. Instead, I tucked it into the journal I'd been writing, the one for the ones who come after. Not for vengeance. Not for shame. But as proof. That love without boundaries isn't noble. It's self-erasure. That you can forgive someone and still choose to never let them in again. That sometimes, walking away is the kindest thing you can do, for both of you. I looked out my kitchen window. The violets were blooming again. And I, finally, was in full season too. 2 weeks after the house sold, I got a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten, addressed in Elisa's familiar cursive, the same way she used to label her school folders in 8th grade. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity, as always, won. Dad. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I wouldn't blame you if you tossed this in the trash without reading it. But I wanted to try. To say something I never found the courage to say aloud. You were right. About all of it. About the money, yes, but more than that. About how we took your presence, your support, your patience for granted. About how we wrapped you in expectations and called it love, but really, it was convenience. I hate admitting this, but part of me always assumed you'd be there. That you'd keep giving. Because that's what you always did. And when you stopped. When you drew that line. I didn't know how to see you as anything other than an obstacle. That shame, I'm still trying to sort through it. Craig's gone. He took a job in Idaho. The kids and I are renting for now. It's not glamorous, but it's quiet. And I'm learning what it means to stand on my own feet. Asterisk, I'm not asking for money. Or help. Or even forgiveness, not yet. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see you. If you ever want to visit, the kids would be thrilled. So would I, love. Elise. I read it twice. Then a third time. Then I set it down and made a sandwich. Not out of avoidance, but because I needed to process it like a man who had learned not to rush forgiveness. She hadn't asked to be rescued. She hadn't begged for restoration. She just owned it. That meant something. That night, I sat with my journal. Added a new page. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who, eventually, hold the clearest mirror. That reflection isn't for their redemption. It's for yours. I didn't call Elise. Not yet. But I wrote her back. Short. Simple. Honest. Thank you for your letter. I see you too. Let's take it one season at a time. Then I addressed the envelope, sealed it, and walked it down to the mailbox just as the sun was setting. The air smelled like damp earth and early summer. Like something stubborn was trying to grow again. Elise didn't reply immediately. But 3 weeks after I mailed my letter, I got a call. Dad? Her voice was quiet. Not hesitant. Just, different. Like a woman who'd finally learned to breathe without someone else holding the oxygen. I got your note, she said. I've been carrying it in my purse like a receipt I don't want to lose. We both laughed. Carefully. I was thinking, she continued. Would you want to come for dinner sometime next week? Just me and the kids. Nothing fancy. Spaghetti and frozen garlic bread level hospitality. Spaghetti's fancy enough, I said. So I went. Her rental was small but clean. No marble countertops. No custom light fixtures. The living room smelled like lavender and meat sauce, and the twins jumped on me like I'd never left. We ate at a second-hand table with mismatched chairs. Michael told me about his science project. His sister showed me a book she'd finished, in one night flat. Elise didn't say much until the kids were in bed. Then she sat across from me at the kitchen island, no wine, no performance. Just us. I still think about that Thanksgiving, she said. About the empty chair. I think about it too, I admitted. I filled it with pride, she said. With other people's approval. With the idea of a life I thought I had to perform. She looked up. I'm not performing anymore. We sat in that soft, humbling silence for a while. The kind that feels less like an apology and more like healing. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a familiar object. The lamp. I burst out laughing. I thought you sold it. I tried, she said. No one wanted it. Can't imagine why. We laughed harder than we had in years. Not because the lamp was funny, though it was, but because forgiveness had finally found enough space between us to take root. Before I left, Elise walked me to the door. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were, she said. I don't want that. I want something better. Something honest. I looked at her. My daughter. Not as I once knew her. But as she was now. Smaller life. Bigger heart. Me too, I said. She reached for a hug, not the kind you give out of guilt or obligation. But the kind that says, I know what I did. And I want to start again anyway. As I drove home under the stars, I realized something. The chair had never really been empty. It had just been waiting for someone to earn their way back to it. Summer came fast that year. By July, Spokane was dressed in green and gold, the air thick with cut grass, barbecues, and the laughter of people who remembered how to slow down. I'd fallen into a rhythm, reading at the community center, Sunday dinners at Rosa's, the occasional evening walk with Elise and the kids. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. No grand reconciliations. No dramatic speeches. Just a slow rebuilding. Brick by honest brick. One evening, Michael asked if he could interview me for a school project. It's about personal history, he said. And legacy. I raised an eyebrow. Legacy? Yeah, he said. Like what people remember when you're gone. But I want to do it while people are still here. So we sat in Elisa's tiny backyard with a recorder and a notebook. He asked me questions about my childhood, about Grandma Janice, about my job, my hobbies, even my biggest regret. I paused on that one. Letting too much of my love come with a receipt, I said. He tilted his head. What does that mean? It means I gave until I resented it. Because I didn't ask for anything back. And when I finally did, it was too late. He nodded, serious beyond his years. I won't do that. I'll ask. I hope you will, I said. And I hope you'll give, too. But not out of guilt. Out of joy. When he finished writing, he hugged me without being asked. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the journal one last time. The one marked for the ones who come after. On the final page, I wrote. You don't have to burn bridges to walk away. Sometimes, you just have to stop holding them up. Family is not made from blood or history. It's made from presence. From people who show up. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. If they love you, you'll never have to buy your seat at the table. I closed the journal and placed it next to the ledger, now a closed chapter, brittle with dust but solid with lessons. The next morning, I donated the ledger to the fireplace. Watched it curl and collapse into quiet ash. And in its place, I built a birdhouse with Isaiah. Taught Michael how to make sourdough. Replanted Janice's violets, which had started to wilt. At Elisa's next dinner, there were 5 chairs at the table. Mine wasn't the biggest. But it was finally mine. Earned. Chosen. Respected. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was home.